Hello, ladies and gentlemen and other vile individuals of indiscriminate hooliganery.
We are that review duo of questionable intelligence and sanity.
And integrity.
Definitely integrity.
Every word out of our mouth is a lie, a deceit, and the absolute truth.
And you know that because we never lie.
Exactly.
And we are known as Adventuresome Reviews. Woo woo! Ah! Madness.
Massive acclaim that doesn't exist.
Yes.
Today, we are reviewing Death, Runes, and Dragons by William Collins.
Which is a marginally decent title, I must say.
And a novella.
Yes, so it's not terribly long. It'd be a great short-term read.
Yes, and since this is such a short book, I will be commenting on a book I read a solo after it.
He's going to be telling me all the spoilers and all the details.
Which will require some little bit of finagling when we actually get down to the point, because I forgot to look at the author's name again.
I'm sure we'll manage.
This is a well-run machine, people.
Especially since after we finish the novella, I intend to be just an absolute disaster for him.
Yes.
It'll be hilarious.
Hilarious. Synopsis, my minion.
This is a world where mages derive their sorcery by burning jewels, or else ripping away the abilities of others through transplants. A world of dinosaurs, monsters, and inhuman monster hunters. Ooh. A world of daily eclipses, periodic meteor showers, and trains built upon the spines of beasts. That is an excellent kill phrase there.
Yeah.
It looks just all sorts of happy, daffy, laffy taffy here.
Yeah.
This novella follows the exploits of Verity Verret, a failed actor, average jewel burner, and reluctant monster hunter. Not only is Verity a penniless wanderer, stranded in the Simhura deserts, but he finds himself captured and imprisoned by the Dominga. Very scary.
Very scary.
A tyrannical force well on its way to conquering all of Serather. But Verity has a secret. One that may see him deal with the Dominga a significant blow, or one that will get himself killed horribly for our entertainment, of course.
Yes. So, the part I like best about the book is actually really well conveyed in the synopsis, and that is, the book is actually really well built. Like, the world of the book is really cool and fun and interesting. It talks about having the giant skeletons upon which trains are built, and they span continents.
Yeah.
And there's other ones that are castle-sized, and there's dinosaurs running around, as well as the usual just collection of various fantasy races. Various different magic systems, and the jewel burning is quite a lot like the Mistborn burning of the metals.
Yeah.
Slightly different because they don't consume them, and there's way more variety of what can be achieved. And it was just like, seeing the world was cool and fun,
but also the author handled it absolutely to perfection, because
that's where I disagreed.
Like
he showed off a lot of it really good, really well, but my issue was that there was so much going around in the world that it overstuffed the novella, and it compelled the author to be very blunt, and just, he would introduce one comment and then spend a paragraph bluntly explaining what it was, especially for very simple concepts that could be much more organically and enjoyably conveyed just through experiencing them.
Maybe a little, but I was not struck by the overabundance of exposition ever.
It's not so much the overabundance of exposition, it was just...
The author constantly introduced new concepts, and he conveyed them effectively and curtly, right? Without necessarily going into bullet points. And he a lot of the times used the story as a way to explain the mechanics of how a magic worked. Like, he never once stopped. No,
that's the thing, is that every time he introduced a new concept, or almost every time he introduced a new concept, he would stop and he would explain it. And that is more of a fault of limited time consumption rather than
I just don't remember him taking like a paragraph or so to explain the jewel burning. Like, yes,
No, he did. Especially what every jewel did, and your main character uses various jewels, and so it's just.
I guess, but that he never took a paragraph. That was always handled with just a single sentence or what have you.
But it's still just there was a lot of concepts he had to explain in a short story.
I suppose.
But
Still,
again, it wasn't.
He handled it much better than he could have, because it rarely, if ever, actively slowed the story down, and I was never bored, which is obviously the primary concern when explaining something.
Yeah.
And once again, it was held by the fact that every concept he chose to incorporate in the story was interesting.
Yeah. Verity as a main character, I liked. Again, not a whole lot of time to really delve into him. Mm-hmm. My favorite part about him was like his power level. Was like he's not an overpowered character, he's not an overly weak character. He's a nice mid-range character, and the author made good use of that, having Verity interact with the world and get creative with his uses of his magic and his resources to overcome obstacles. And I enjoyed the way he exploited and utilized his surroundings.
Verity also had, for a short story, Verity had a surprising amount of backstory that was once again introduced very effectively, at least for me, and personality. It was briefly mentioned in the synopsis about how he's a failed thespian, and this comes up once or twice of something happens and reminded him of being on the stage because he was captured and he was putting on a little bit of a show, right? And this kind of also led into another really nice scene wherein he's about to get tortured and he's being a little bit flippant about it, even in his mind. And so this clearly tells the readers that, all right, there's something afoot here. He's not actually in danger. But then in comes the secondary magic class, the one who can steal the abilities from other via, what was the word? Transplants. And instantly he becomes significantly more nervous and says, oh snap, I'm in trouble, which was really enjoyable because it lent a massive amount of threat to this secondary mage character. And so it was once again just a story beat that was well handled.
Yeah. Speaking about the secondary mage character, the author also introduces multiple different magical species. And while I liked having all the various different species, a lot of the species felt more like an amalgamation of animals, or just like, I don't remember the exact description of them, but it was just threw various animal designs together and goes, out you go. As opposed to like really thought out and well designed, like an actual species as opposed to creative character design go.
Once again, though, this book is a novella, so
yes,
necessarily
but
creating.
Yes, that is accurate, but it's still just throwing various animal pieces together, saying species is a little bit simplistic, and it's not even that I wanted a huge backstory for the species. I just would have liked it so that they weren't just I'm trying to think of like a good way to express it, because not like they had cat's head and lizard bodies. They weren't chimeric. They were sort of along the lines of like lizard people or cat people individually, but not that basic because they were a unique species. But it was just...
So just anthropomorphic?
Sort of just anthropomorphic, but also there was never anything new in any of the creature designs. It was always exclusively details you would see in other animals, per se.
Maybe I can't really remember any one of them too vividly, which probably is a slight detriment to the fact that none of the creatures left me with a lasting impression. But altogether, what this basically tells you is that the book suffers from an abundance of ideas and world depth more than anything, and just a lack of time, which is, all things considered,
Not necessarily the worst issue to have.
particularly because the book is first in a series, so you will get more time in the world to explore the various concepts.
Yeah.
Like for me, I would have no problem whatsoever reading another book in this series.
Agreed.
I'm actively interested in it, particularly because the book ends with him sailing across the sea, or not sailing, but riding across the sea on a train that's driving across the spine of a massive creature. It's like, that is an excellent place to end off a book.
Yeah.
On the way to your second adventure in one of the coolest trains ever.
Yeah.
Right?
This is actually an author I've read before that you haven't, and the author himself has improved significantly over the course of his various books. His first book series was a sort of Harry Potter-esque kid discovers magical world, ends up going to a school, and that world was both little less. Even in that series, the books in that series, they were refined significantly as the series went along, and it's just the author is continuously improving over the course of 3 or 4 books now.
Imagine where he'll be in like 4 books.
Yeah.
We're watching his career with great interest.
I am watching it with great despair. Just to be difficult.
Fine.
Did you have anything else to comment on?
Just another minor comment to once again convey how the author is actually marginally competent with his craft, and it's not to go into any spoiler details, but Verity is faced with a task near the climax of the book, and he decides to do something that we as the author tells us, and we as the readers recognizes, this is probably going to blow up in his face. It's an incredibly unwise maneuver, and so it's like, it's one of those moments where
Creative problem solving, but also
actively conveying how not tedious, but
tenuous,
or something like that. It's a T word. The situation is, and how this is
textile.
Yes, textile.
Tactical.
No, I like textile so much better. It is completely wrong. So how textile the situation is, and how likely it is to end in disaster, which is something that frequently gets overlooked when the main character does something stupid. It's the main character doing something crazy. Oh, this is clearly going to work out. No, this time it's like, this is an incredibly bad idea. Let's go for it anyway, because we're kind of in a corner here.
Yeah. So just all in all, I would have given the short story about 4 stars. I enjoyed it from get-go.
4 stars. I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay, so
Now,
you're ready.
tell me a story.
This story, I don't remember the author's name, so you're going to have to look up Fixing Your Stars.
All right, fixing my stars.
Your stars.
Fixing his stars.
Fixing our stars.
I'm listening.
This is a time travel story. Ooh. The initial premise is, man gets hit in the head with a volleyball while at a party, develops mathematical genius. He gets like a organic HUD that he can see vectors and distances like to percentile accuracy.
Kind of like magic glasses, only cooler.
And no glasses, just in his eyes.
Yeah.
And so he plays around with this over the course of the beginning of part of the book and eventually builds himself a time travel machine with the purpose of going back in time to prevent his wife from contracting some terrible disease.
As you do.
As you do.
And there's absolutely no way this is going to end in disaster or become a time loop.
Yes?
I am all of a sudden very disappointed in this book.
I know, but that's one of my main complaints is that the book did not utilize its time travel well. He travels back to the 1980s or 70s. So you're going back into a time that through popular culture, most people are extremely familiar with and is extremely comparable to our modern day. So the time period that you travel back to isn't interesting. And while there's probably some interesting stuff back then that people, the younger audience like you and I could have enjoyed, the author does not do a good job of exploring that, of showing what was cool or aesthetic about that time period to the reader. And so it ends up being that the time period, the time travel mechanic, is underwhelmingly utilized up until the end of the book, when the changes that he makes in the past are reconciled into the future. And so the timeline adjusts around his actions. And so that was one of the parts I liked. And I also liked the beginning part where you were first being introduced to the HUD and his advanced abilities and how he was working around them and figuring out how to, and thinking carefully about how to utilize them so he doesn't become exploited but also to advance his personal means, etc., etc., etc. The book suffers in the center, the meat of it, where they're actually in the past, because he gets a freeloader.
Hopefully somebody with witty remarks.
No. And so this part of the book dragged for me because he goes back with he has a clear-cut plan.
Okay.
Very simple. And what's the word?
I'm completely
hookups.
lost here. Hookups. Wait, hookups?
Hang-ups, rather.
Okay, hang-ups. There we are.
The problems that the author throws at his main character are often caused by the main character himself.
Ouch. No.
Yes, and he goes from being an extremely careful and intelligent person in the future to being absolutely average, making loads of mistakes, being willfully blind to situations while in the past. And his companion, who is mildly more effective, still makes decisions that, on the superficial level, like, why are you doing that? That makes no sense. And so even though on the back end, you understand what she was doing, the logic behind it, you still have several chapters where you're like, I don't like what you're doing here. And then you add on to that the actual conflict of that time period isn't interesting. It's not, and I don't even necessarily wanted an action story or
Hunted by the FBI.
Yeah, I didn't want any of that, but
though a bank heist or two would have made the story significantly more interesting.
But the author doesn't do anything besides relationship conflict in the past.
Oh, no, I hate relationship conflict.
But it's also somewhat uninteresting in its execution. Because you're doing a time travel book. Why is the primary conflict of your story like, oh, I'm panicking about what's in the future now?
Something he presumably already lived through.
Well, no, this is his wife in the past that's panicking about the future, and it's just, time travel is one of the most narrative-rich concepts you can utilize.
Also the most open to just being chucked out the window and causing all sorts of weird and wackiness.
Yes, and it's reduced to a very simplistic narrative that sapped a lot of that just failed to catch my interest. And it doesn't help that the characters, when they're in the past, aren't immensely likable. Because it's not like it's not that they're bereft of motivations or of decisions, because they constantly make decisions and have motivations. It's just the characters aren't fun to hang around with. Standard isn't even the right word. It's just, they're very pedestrian. They're not, your main character isn't someone who is going out there and he's going to make changes and forcefully writes the world in his direction, which would be like which would be a hyper-actualized character archetype to make them interesting, fighting against the world to get what they want. That's a very potent and charismatic character type, but they're also not funny or wacky, or they're very standard.
Almost an office drone.
No, again, that's too low. It's just, there's someone you can meet on the street, which is, while entirely accurate, this is a fictional science fiction novel. You want your character to have a little bit of spark.
Just a little bit larger than life.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily bad, it's just, it compounds the middle of the story lacking spark and energy, proper energy. These to deal with its concepts and its characters. And
is there a villain at least?
no villain.
Antagonists?
Nope.
That is remarkably disconcerting.
Yeah, and so it's just, it ends up being a somewhat lackluster narrative for me.
What would have been really cool is if he gets bitten by a rat, goes back to the future, and starts a plague, and that's book 2, right? Because he has a mad genius, so he could also be the one who cures the plague because of his genius.
So yeah, I like the beginning part and the end part of the book. The end part is where he returns to the future, and this is where the book actually, narrative conflict gets introduced that's outside, that's not directly his cause, and that's outside and is actively threatening to him. And it's also, as he goes to the future, it's where all the various changes he's made into the past reconcile with the future as he knows. This is where the actual time travel gets utilized effectively, because you're sitting there as you go through multiple different timelines, as everything keeps changing around him to before it finally settles, and that's where and it was interesting to watch and to see the various different lives that he could have lived. And the first part is interesting because, again, you have external conflict on him, and as well as the internal conflict of him learning how to deal with his expanded senses.
Is he superhuman at all, or just big-brained?
Just big-brained with an organic HUD that shows vectors and distances, and it's all purely mathematical.
Right. Is he aware of his... So obviously he comes back to the future and the future changes. Is he still aware of his past future?
Yes.
All right. Interesting. Is that all?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I would give the book about 3 stars.
A bit depressing, but
There's
all right.
better time travel books. And part of it is that before that I read a much better utilized time travel book. And we don't want to get into it, though it's a book I would suggest you read because I really enjoyed it.
All right. By any chance, is this author Stephen A. Simpson?
It very well might be. The book cover should be... Yep, that's it.
Aha! We have found this criminal.
We are magnificent.
Yes. We did what the FBI and all their goons could not. An internet search onto Goodreads. I assume that's all?
That's everything.
All right.
Toodaloos, ladies and gentlemen.
Fairly well, our future friends.
Au revoir. Goodbye. Arrivederci.